the What Really Happened radio show, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, July 2nd, 2013. 2 more days to Independence Day, or what we used to call Independence Day. I'm not even sure what they're bothering to call it this year here. Have you noticed how the government tells us not to worry about, GMO foods, and not to worry about oil in the Gulf of Mexico and corrects it, not to worry about radiation from Fukushima, not to worry about compact fluorescent bulbs that have mercury and radioactive materials in them, and not to worry about American cars whose brakes fail and steering locks up and fuel tanks explode, but we're not allowed to have sparklers because we might harm ourselves? Kind of a weird double standard there. All right, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble here. And looking at the corporate media, they're back to all Zimmerman all the time, blow-by-blow coverage of all the testimony. They're just pounding this thing. They're selling this idea. This is the most important story in America. Pay no attention to NSA Gate and IRS Gate and DOJ Gate and Gate and all this stuff. That's last week's news. You got to pay attention to this highly charged, emotional, racially motivated murder trial. And again, look at all the coverage it's getting. And murders happen in the United States all the time. Why is this getting so much coverage? I think we're being set up here, and reinforcing that, of course, is this story that we just got from the Trenches World Report, where already in the town of Sanford, Florida, which is where this trial is taking place, the police are already going door to door in what they say is preparation for potential riots. They're selling that idea, Zimmerman case riots, Zimmerman case riots. Remember, on Thursday, Adam Kokesh was going to do that nonsensical, stupid armed march right into Washington, D.C., tailor-made for the government to propagandize, oh, those gun owners, they're dangerous, they're anti-American, they're a threat to the nation. And fortunately, that whole plan cratered. And it's feeling a lot to me like we're being set up the same way we were back in 1992, where they, up in Sylmar, California, they had the trial of the 4 officers who beat Rodney King to a pulp. And they literally threw the case to the defense as hard as they could. The judge told the jury that unless they could all agree which specific blow of the baton represented excessive force, that they had to acquit the police. And they acquitted the police, and the riot started, and all kinds of nefarious things going on. And right now, this government would love nothing better than to see nationwide race riots that would allow for the suspension of what's left of our Constitution, declaration of martial law, gun grab, and all the rest of that. So please, regardless of the verdict in the Zimmerman case, because probably most of you don't even know Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin. It doesn't really directly impact you. Regardless of the verdict, do not engage in any rioting, because I'm going to tell you right now, those people who are out there with the Molotov cocktails screaming, we've got to burn down whatever, they're the government undercover informants. It's another setup to try and foment some kind of violence inside the United States that would allow the government to complete the transition from the republic that was founded by the Constitution into their new world order fascist dictatorship, where you will do as you're told, eat what you're told, take the medicines you're told, provide us with your wealth, your money, your gold, and your children for wars of conquest, and you will like it. So please don't be as stupid as the U.S. government right now is hoping you are. Don't fall for it. This just reeks of setup. And again, I don't know Zimmerman. I don't know Trayvon Martin, or I did not know Trayvon Martin. It doesn't really affect us, and yet it's being promoted as the big story we should all get emotionally tangled with. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as you remember, last week we had Paul Topetti from Freedom Palooza and the band Poker Face. He was on our show talking about Freedom Palooza and their plans to expand this to other cities. And it's basically just an annual get-together for people to gather and talk on the human net about what's going wrong with the country. And needless to say, Freedom Palooza is opposed by those who don't value the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Now, freedom of speech is an absolute, and the measure of your commitment to the principle is when you support the right of people to say something you don't agree with. But we do have certain individuals in this country who feel that the right to freedom of speech ought to be limited, that you ought not to criticize the government, or you ought not to criticize a certain foreign government. And perhaps not surprisingly, the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center, who have absolutely no respect for the Constitution of the United States of America, have just opened up with, guns blazing against Freedom Palooza, and apparently they are calling and harassing the scheduled speakers, trying to get them to cancel. They're trying to interfere with the permits for the venue. Every dirty trick they can think of, they're pulling to try and shut this down, because you're not allowed in the United States of America to say certain things in their view. You may have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, but you're only allowed to exercise it when you say things we, the rulers of the world, agree with. And the whole point of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech is that we, the people, have a right, recognized, not granted, recognized by the government, to speak out when the government is not serving the interests of the American people, as seems to be pretty much the majority of the time these days. And we are seeing a government and a political power structure that is openly defying the Constitution, violating our civil rights, and trying to figure out some way they can just get rid of it all as a annoyance and inconvenience. Remember, a few months back we had these trial balloon articles in the New York Times and on MSNBC saying, really, it's time to get rid of that Constitution and the Bill of Rights because it's just getting in the way of the efficient operation of the federal government. And we all know that we should have an efficient government that just does what it needs to do, sort of like Nazi Germany had. And there's no question the German government of that time was very efficient, kept the trains running on schedule. But I think if you ask the German people now, they'd say, no, it wasn't worth the efficiency to lose our civil rights and our control over the government here. So the ADL and the SPLC are out there just trying to find some way they can shut this down any way they can, because by golly, there are certain things you're not supposed to know about, because that's how they control your mind. That's all mind control is controlling the brain by controlling what it knows, to make sure you don't have those bad thoughts, because that would be double plus ungood. Now, Edward Snowden is back out there making headlines. He issued a formal statement which basically said the same thing that we've been commenting on here at Republic Broadcasting for quite some time. The U.S. government is afraid of you, the American people, because now you're awake and you realize what the true nature of this nation and this government has become. And it's very ugly. It is not the nation we were all brainwashed into thinking we lived in by those state-controlled public schools. It's mutated into something very, very ugly indeed. Now, as you probably remember, after some back and forth, it came out that Russia had offered asylum to Edward Snowden in addition for ceasing to publicly embarrass the United States of America. And Putin did this in order to defuse these attempts by American politicians like John McCain to somehow portray Snowden as part of an evil Russian plot in order to duck the reality that our government is in blatant violation of the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 10th Amendments of the Bill of Rights. We didn't do anything wrong. It's an evil Russian plot. We must hate the Russians. And so forth and so on. Now, Snowden has rejected the Russian offer and saying he is not going to go silent, even if it means he is not allowed to stay inside Russia. And we're already hearing from The Guardian. There are more revelations yet to come about this insane spy system on law-abiding citizens around the world. And that is really what the issue comes down to. We're seeing a lot of articles coming out and saying, well, you know, spying on other governments, that's just sort of par for the course. And, you know, those other governments are all doing it too. They're starting to resort to the, hey, they're all doing it, therefore we're blameless excuse. We understand military spying and spying on, foreign governments here, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about total surveillance on law-abiding Americans in outright defiance of the Constitution. That's what we're talking about here. And they're trying to take the focus away and say, well, really, it's about national security. We're spying on the United Nations and we're spying on the European Union. Aren't those our allies? We're spying on our allies. And yes, the U.S. government does that. Remember, we were talking about the history of cryptography, how the U.S. government and the allies were not able to break the German Enigma code until they got their hands on an actual machine, and after the war was over, they made presents of these machines to all the friendly nations without telling them that they could now read the messages encrypted on them. So it's kind of an ongoing thing, and as I said, spying for military reasons on weapons research in each other's country that goes along all the time, spying on each other's diplomats, that's just sort of part of that whole thing. What we're talking about here is total surveillance on you, the American people, who have done nothing wrong. There's no grounds for suspicion. They just want to be able to constantly look in and read the little romantic text messages you're sending to your significant other. Or more to the point, they want to look in for any business opportunities, information on what you're doing that might be useful to their buddy who's in the same line of work. Or to run off to the stock brokerage and buy stock in your company because they know you're going to launch a new product in just 2 weeks. All of this is illegal. It's called insider trading. And this government has a history of doing that, and that is why you should be angry. They're literally harvesting your creative projects from you for their own personal gain. And you should be angry. So Snowden is out there basically saying that he will not accept any kind of a deal that says he has to shut up. And he's going to go on releasing more information about the scale of this massive U.S. government spying on planet Earth. Meanwhile, Chucky Schumer is out there saying Russia should pay a price for harboring the NSA leaker. I don't think it really qualifies as harboring. Snowden flew from Hong Kong to Moscow. He's still hanging out basically at the airport. It's a real-life version of the movie The Terminal. But Chucky Schumer's, he's out there saying, oh, it's Russia, it's the Russian plot. You know, pay no attention to the U.S. government's violation of the Constitution. That's just a trivial issue. We have to go Russia. They're trying to demonize Russia as hard as they can because in the long run of this plan to return the world to Bretton Woods, it does mean war with Russia and China. And Putin knows it. China's government knows it. We know it. It's an all-or-nothing deal. And so already we're saying, oh, bad China, bad Russia. Any excuse to make the Russians look bad and try and drag us back to the world of the 1950s. You know, when there was the Cold War and we were all brainwashed to wet ourselves when we heard the word commie. So, Chucky, if you really feel that way about Russia, here's your rifle and here's your parachute. We're going to grab a phone call here now. Kent in West Virginia. Aloha, Kent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just real quick, you mentioned the SPLC, and you being a Hollywood special effects guy, I have an observation for you. I think you might. Did you ever notice that this character or creature, we'll call him this Mark Potok of the SPLC, closely resembles the Ewok in Star Wars?
I hadn't really noticed, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I thought... if you look up an Ewok and you look up his picture, there is more than a passing resemblance there. So,
Manny in the control room is saying he reminds me of a Who from Whoville, and
yeah.
You know, excessively fuzzy. You know, I really don't want to get into personal attacks on the people over at the SPLC. I mean, that kind of negates the focus on what it is that they're doing. And the SPLC, despite its very grandiose warm and fuzzy name, it doesn't really spend a lot of time on Southern poverty or even on the law. They, like the ADL, their mission is clearly to suppress any criticism or questioning of Israel among the American people. And they're certainly demonstrating that right now with their relentless attacks on Freedom Palooza, which is going to go ahead anyway, and maybe some of the speakers aren't going to show up, but hey, it's more time for just, you know, beer and hot dogs and the music, because there's going to be a lot of music. It is a music festival, after all.
Okay, well, I just thought I'd pass that observation on, and I thought it was funny anyway. All right, well, thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. And by the way, a reminder that the WhatReallyHappened.com website is a proud member of the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of websites you should never, ever, 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 ever read, or your nose will fall off. So let's see, more information coming out from The Guardian. The NSA not only bugged the European Union, we were talking about that yesterday, they apparently succeeded in bugging the United Nations. Aren't these supposed to be our friends and allies over there? And again, we're not too surprised about that. But again, the focus for we, the American people, isn't that the government is spying on other governments. It's that it's spying on us. Everything we do, our credit card purchases, our download history, our browsing history, without probable cause, complete constitutional violation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm just now looking, even over at INFOWARS, they've got an article by Paul Joseph Watson saying Trayvon supporters threaten riots and looting if Zimmerman is acquitted. It's like a flashing neon sign. We, the government, are going to start riots so we can come in and crush the American people down, take their guns, their gold, their wealth. They're telegraphing. This is a setup. They're pre-selling everybody to associate Zimmerman trial, rioting. Zimmerman trial, rioting. And when the rioting happens, the corporate media say, oh, it's all about that Zimmerman thing here. You know, had nothing to do with the crushing economy and the homelessness and the joblessness and the hunger and all of our kids coming back from these wars of conquest dead and disfigured. And all the corruption and all the Wall Street frauds got nothing to do with that. It's all about Zimmerman. We blame the Zimmerman case for the violence. The government wants this to happen. The U.S. government is desperate for some kind of civil unrest that they can use as an excuse to declare a national emergency. Why do you think they've been buying all those hollow point bullets and all these armored cars for the civilian police force? They have been preparing for war on the American people. All they need is a new Pearl Harbor to kick it off, and I think this is what they're trying to go with this thing, and that's why it's just, again, still on TV on Fox. Oh, all Zimmerman all the time. Oh, my goodness there. All righty, so getting back to the thing. Over in Europe, Barack Obama is out there trying to mend fences because the revelation of this NSA spying has triggered a huge public outcry all around the world. Now, obviously, the government insiders and those of us paying attention have known it's been going on all along. The difference is now ordinary people who had lulled themselves into a false sense of safety by knowing they're not actually engaged in any criminal activities are now realizing every little sexy email they sent to their significant other, every website full of bikini pictures they ever looked at, every one of their online purchases and browsing history, credit card purchases have been looked at by some complete total stranger on a government paycheck. They're upset about it. And because the people all across Europe are upset about this, the governments of Europe are upset about it, Obama is over there trying to sort of quell this all down and say, hey, it's no big deal, really. What are you all screaming about? We're not doing anything bad. We're just keeping an eye on the herd, which I think is the attitude problem that's really at the heart of this outrage that we're seeing here. And I'm sure Obama is over there, saying something along the lines of, first off, let me apologize for any wounded feelings that have arisen in the wake of revelations that the United States has been spying on, well, pretty much everybody. But before you make your final decision on the free trade talks, I wish to remind you that excerpts of your communications with Fifi's phone fantasies could easily be leaked to the media of your respective countries. I await your acceptance of my apology, which I know will be forthcoming. I'm sure there's probably a lot of that going on. That, of course, is the real danger of the NSA spying, is that it gives an unelected body of the U.S. government tremendous power over the rest of the world by ferreting out their little dark, shameful secrets that may not even be crimes, but it's still something that must be kept private, and use that to basically control the world. Now, over in Germany, and this is reported on The Blaze, Malte Spitz, who's a member of Germany's Green Party, said, don't let this talk about metadata convince you that this is harmless. And he basically went back and took his own metadata from Deutsche Telekom and then basically showed how much information could be gleaned about his personal life just from the metadata. And so the idea that this is somehow harmless information is complete nonsense. You can find out a person's sexual orientation. You can find out their dietary habits. You can find out all this stuff, what bookstores they're going to. Now, have you noticed the irony here that it wasn't too long ago that the United States government declared hacking of U.S. computers equivalent to an act of war, justifying a full military response, and now they've been caught being the hackers, hacking all these other nations' computer systems in order to spy on their people, hacking the European Union offices, hacking the United Nations. So by the United States government's own definition, the United States has now carried out acts of war against the European Union, the United Nations, virtually every country on earth, because that was the U.S. attitude. Hacking represents an act of war. Now, George Bush, remember him? He was the one who said his job would be easier if he was the dictator and the Constitution was a blankety-blank piece of paper. And basically came out and said, you know, Snowden was wrong to do this thing, and basically said he didn't care if Americans approved of his policies unless it was an election year. And other than that, he was just going to go do what he wanted to do for himself and his cronies, which, again, observers have known that's kind of the attitude all along. But now he's out there saying it. I don't care what you think. My younger brother actually saw Bush at a public appearance after he was done being president. And he said that to the crowd. Yeah, I don't give a darn what you think about me anymore. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the latest propaganda spin on the Edward Snowden case is, well, why didn't he go through the proper channels? You know, we have ombudsmen and we have these other little institutions there that you're supposed to go to when you are concerned about the behavior of your superiors in the government. Harumph, 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 harumph. And the obvious answer is because those whistleblowers who have gone through proper channels wind up being arrested, charged with espionage, thrown in prison, or otherwise silenced. Those purported official government proper channels are set up as traps to get to the whistleblowers before they go public. That's all they really do. And we saw this same lame commentary the other week when the three of the official investigators into TWA 800 went public, saying they were ordered by the government to lie to the American people about what happened to that 747. And James Kallstrom, who was the FBI agent in charge of the the investigation, came out and said, why didn't they come to me if they were being told to lie? I would have dealt with it. Come on, James, you're the biggest liar of the bunch there. The proper channels don't want to hear whistleblowing. They're part of the mechanism to try and keep the lid on all of this stuff. Back in 1994, when I stumbled across evidence of fraud by the FBI in the case of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, naively, like a loyal, law-abiding American citizen, I tried to go through the proper channels, the police, even the FBI itself, and then the corporate news media, and my career in Hollywood simply evaporated. Not unlike actress Jean Seberg. And for close to 20 years since then, I have been waiting to see somebody inside the government operating from a principle of constitutionality and morality, and they don't exist. I'm sorry we can't give them the benefit of the doubt. There are no people inside the government who are willing to look at the wrongdoing by that government. People in the government love their jobs. They love the fact that they're paid 30 to 40% more what people in the private sector are doing for the same work. And nobody's watching them if they're just goofing off like all those people at the SEC, spending their time looking at online porn while Bernie Madoff is ripping off his investors. They're like the subjects in that infamous Stanley Milgram experiment. They're perfectly willing to go along with inflicting harm on the people of the United States of America, harm on the Constitution, as long as the person signing that fat paycheck says it's the correct thing to do. The Nazis had the same degree of cooperation from their civil service workers. There are no proper channels that are actually going to accomplish change to the wrongdoing of the nation. Only the illusion of one. so the government can go on saying, oh, yes, we're doing the right job. We have all these, systems set up here as a check on our power and authority, but they don't exist. As Claire Wolfe put it, we're long past the point where it's still possible to work within the system, because the system does not take care of the people or the nation. The system takes care of itself. Like a cancer, it preserves and promotes itself at the expense of everything healthy around it. I'm afraid this government has reached the point where it cannot be fixed from within, because nobody inside the government wants it fixed. They're getting their goodies. They're having a good time. All the perks and all the benefits and all the extra pay. Alrighty, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Glenn, are you there? I guess not. I guess we lost him. Alrighty, now we're looking at the recent visit to Germany by Obama, where he went out there and he did a little speechification, and there was a small crowd there, considerably smaller than the one when he was there back in 2008. And most of the people at that new protest were carrying all these anti-American, anti-Obama signs. And basically the opinion among the German people is they used to love Obama. They thought he was going to get the United States back under control, get it back on the track to the Republic. Now they don't trust him. Welcome to our world, German people. All right, I understand Glenn in Philadelphia is back online. Glenn, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, I'm curious. Have you been following the story at all that I've been hearing about, that the U.S. is supposedly contracting with Russia to use Russian troops on American soil in the event of civil disruption or
It's a hoax.
or anything like that?
It's a hoax.
It is a hoax?
It's a hoax. It all came from a story by Saoirse Fall. And what the U.S. and Russia did agree to do is, in the event of a natural disaster, they simply agreed to have the mechanisms in place to help each other. But this idea that Russia would send their troops to put down a rebellion by the American people is complete nonsense. Mostly because...
Well, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, mostly because Putin understands that the American people are his allies in trying to restrain the U.S. government from going any further along this World War III policy. And so Putin is not going to do anything to aid the U.S. government to help erase resistance to war from the American people. So it's a completely nonsensical story.
That makes more sense, because I couldn't square this with the notion of what's going on with the S-300s in Syria and such. It's like, wait a minute, on the one hand, they're putting S-300s into Syria. On the other hand, they're arranging to put troops. That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, you know, the U.S. government is spending a huge amount of your taxpayer dollars to basically hire and pay people to put as much junk and nonsense out in the independent media in an attempt to weaken its credibility, so the American people will stop coming to Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com and loyally go back to ABC, CBS, NBC for their daily dose of government-approved propaganda. It's not working. But you know, especially going around the net looking at the feedback on the Snowden case. I mean, these government-paid shills, they're racking up the overtime right now.
Well, what's disturbing is, and as you well know, the Patriot Radio realm, I mean, the entire world is rather cacophonous and contradictory to begin with. And in the Patriot realm, there's certainly a substantive amount of internecine rivalry to begin with. But then, and market share struggling and stuff. But there are people who are otherwise seemingly reputable who are advancing these stories about the idea that there are already thousands of troops, you know, foreign troops on American soil, and that it's just somebody's gonna just drop the hammer, and we're gonna have Red Dawn without the parachutes at some point, and all this kind of stuff.
No, it's nonsense.
And it's really, I know, but there's so much of it. It's really good. It gets that almost difficult to filter out, even if you're thinking and researching and stuff like that after a while. You know, they know how to muddy the water.
Let me use this current story as an example of how it works. You have Saoirse Fall, who's a known disinformation asset. I forget his real name. He lives in Virginia. He's a CIA asset, and he puts out these stories, and then they have a network of enablers and assistants who will take that original story, strip off the identifying marks, and repost it to as many blogs as they can in the hope it'll be picked up and, you know, just spread through the net virally. and sometimes it really does work. And a lot of the people carrying this story don't know it's a hoax and a fraud. Remember, history has shown anybody who got used, abused, betrayed, taken advantage of, had it done to them by somebody they thought they could trust. And, you know, we have a lot of people, even at whatreallyhappened.com, who put up a lot of nonsense stuff that I have to slap down. But again, the general goal, it's jamming. They're trying to put as much nonsense out there to kookify the net and to make it harder for people to get to the real information they're trying to find. And that's why you're seeing all this stuff about chemtrails and phony Apollo moon landings and Elvis in a UFO and Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot's love child and all the rest of that other stuff out. No plane at the Pentagon is another good example. They're out there trying to basically poison the well. That's the term of crap propagandists use, poison the well. Find an area where people are really starting to get too close to a really damaging secret and throw a piece of nonsense in there that can be used to discredit the whole question.
Right, right. It's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. They do like the waters to be quite muddy. But,
yes.
You know, actually, one other question. I was thinking about the stuff you cover. Now, I'm not necessarily a disciple of this guy. I'm center right, slightly right of center.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer, you know, personal responsibility to the welfare state if you can get it in a healthy economy. But Webb Tarpley, who's like a New Dealer, he's a devotee of FDR. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's a big New Dealer, but economist, historian. Did you ever listen to his stuff? He actually he does a good job of you know, documenting and backing his stuff and tying in historical stuff. I don't know if you ever had him on.
Oh, yes, we have had him on the show before. You know,
yeah,
we know each other.
I don't necessarily agree with him. He's very erudite, and he certainly backs up. You know, he does document what he says, and I find he actually succeeds in making me empathetic to his agenda sometimes, just because he's so fact-based and fleshes out his arguments so well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, take care, Mike. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Catherine in Ottawa. Aloha, Catherine. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I just wanted to let you know that they've just announced on the CBC that the RCMP apparently thwarted a terror attack. Their own words are an al-Qaeda-inspired terror attack on the BC legislature in Victoria using pressure cooker bombs.
Okay, it's another hoax. That's what it is.
Know that
they're trying to scare everybody back into saying, "Oh, please, government, save me from the evil terrorists." You know, and it's the little boy who cried pressure cooker. I mean, sorry, wolf too many times here, or nuclear duck, or whatever else it is. And
I completely agree. And watching the two officers as they were answering the questions,
yeah,
the evasiveness that they used in their language. The taller of the two, his facial expressions as his eyes shifted back and forth, and really basically avoiding answering any questions. Not that there were very many good ones asked, but it was, I just sat there with my mouth hanging open, and I thought, well, I better call Michael and let him know, and he can throw that up on the site so we can all, you know, look at it and shake our heads. It feels so wrong. Apparently the bombs were supposed to go off yesterday on Canada Day.
Well, you know, one thing we need to be aware of, and of course here in the United States we're only 2 days away from a symbolic date which invites a false flag. If they're going to do a big bang to get us all hot and bothered to go make war on those gosh darn Arab Muslims, there has to be sort of a pre-sell ramping up of, oh, here's a terror attack, here's a terror attack, here's a terror attack. And especially with all this spying, they're trying to justify total surveillance of all Americans by saying, oh, it's saving you from acts of terror. But again, when you press them for details, you know, oh no, we'll reveal methods, we'll reveal secrets. The few cases where they've claimed to have thwarted terror attacks with this total surveillance, it turned out they're talking about cases that were solved with regular police work or undercover informants. The NSA guy is including on his list of thwarted terror attacks all of these entrapments set up by the FBI, where the FBI informants go out and say, I'm going to blow up a school bus and try not to burn my lips on the tailpipe, and here's some money if you will help me do it. And they get some patsy who's desperate for money in this economy and say, oh, all right, I'll help you. Boom, they arrest him, and they get big headline stories. They're trying to keep up this illusion there's a terrorism threat that is so great that we should completely abandon any idea of constitutional protections and freedom of speech, freedom of privacy. You know, just surrender all of that stuff to be protected from this evil menace that the government has pretty much created itself.
I think that might be the case here as well. And they described them in another interesting way. They called them self-radicalized.
Yes.
And following this Al-Qaeda ideology. And at least one person did ask, well, can you define what you mean by Al-Qaeda ideology? And I have to say the officer was stumbling through that whole explanation, and it made no sense whatsoever. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of this is very self-perpetuated. They said they had insider people. They waited to pick them up yesterday. If they knew this was going on, they could have arrested them well beforehand, you know. So it's just, it's like a theater. It is like a theater, and I think they're hiring the worst producers in Hollywood to do it.
Well,
because
any good producers,
it's so difficult to believe.
Any good producers, you know, aren't going to work for the U.S. government because you know, they have a moral code that they're going to follow. You know, we're seeing this terminology again, where they're talking about self-radicalized or Al-Qaeda-like, because most people now understand there really isn't an Al-Qaeda. It's sort of the modern-day version of 1984's Emmanuel Goldstein. All the Al-Qaeda we've been shown, like Adam Gaddan and Yusuf al-Khattab, they turn out to be fakes and phonies. And the propaganda spin now is that in order to justify spying on every single person on planet Earth, it's because any single person on planet Earth is a potential terrorist if they're self-radicalized. And self-radicalized means anybody who doubts the government about anything is a self-radicalized potential terrorist. And so we're going to start seeing that spin more and more, where the terror threat isn't coming from overseas. It's ordinary people who just all of a sudden get it into their head to go down and write chalk marks in front of a bank pointing out the evils of the banking industry. And you know, now that they've got us all thinking about terror, and have you noticed they changed the meaning of the definitions? Terrorist used to be somebody from another country with an exploding vest. Now terrorism is somebody who is complaining about poor water quality. Weapons of mass destruction used to mean the things that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and now, of course, it's pressure cookers and, you know, and stuff. Mayor Bloomberg is out there banning sparklers because terrorists could make weapons of mass destruction out of those. It's just reached a point of absolute, complete, ridiculous extreme. And the more extreme they get with the propaganda claims, the less and less they're going to be believed. And that's what we're seeing here.
It boggles my mind that people can't, a lot of people just still won't see through that. They seem to be so terrified to let go of this idea of the government being there to protect you. But they're not.
No, they're not. The government is there to take care of the government and take care of businessmen.
Oh, really? The government doesn't care one iota about you. You're just a commodity, in my opinion. You're no better than chattel.
Yeah, you're the herd. You're the herd. You're the livestock that has to be harvested and sent off to fight wars. And that very much is, and of course, that's the attitude you get with any kind of a fascist dictatorship. The population is property.
I have a question. It's a little bit off topic, but in the U.S., do your young people do unpaid internships? Or are there internships financially? Because we've got a real stink going on up here about that as well.
Oh, no.
They're estimating there's between 1 and 300,000 people doing unpaid internships for fetching coffee and doing slave grunt work.
Yeah, it's epidemic here. It's epidemic here, and we got to take a break for commercials, and when we come back, I'll comment on that. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got one more caller on the line, Barb, and I'm not sure where you're calling from. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I'm from Dearborn, Michigan.
Okay.
Okay. You know, I am concerned that the government seems to be doing things that are provocative, that they really want us to get mixing it up as a people. And because I live in Dearborn, I'm very sensitive to that.
Well, no, I absolutely agree. You know, it's very obvious the United States government would rather have a public uprising they can control and crush down as an example of the rest of the world, rather than wait for one to simply spontaneously erupt along the lines of what happened in Romania that they couldn't deal with. They want a little rebellion they can crush in order to forestall a larger rebellion down the road.
Well, you know, here in Dearborn, they've been doing some things that just disturb me. There is several weeks ago, there was a public service article in the paper talking about crowd control, using terms like see something, say something, don't stand next to a container that could hide in a, quote, explosive device. Now, Mike, that could be the garbage can at McDonald's. You don't put this type of thing in a newspaper unless you're trying to get something going.
Well, I think they're just trying to ramp up the level of fear, terror, fear,
Yes.
fear, ahead of a potential false flag, or they're trying to keep people so scared that they're not thinking clearly. But as I've pointed out before, fear is tiring. It's exhausting. And if you keep doing it long enough, your brain literally runs out of the neurotransmitter that signals fear and panic. And it's not even a question of being brave or courageous. You literally can't feel fear any longer, and at that point, all that's left is the rage. And so the amount of time a government can use fear to control their people always has a finite lifespan.
Well, they've just about run it with me. I live in Dearborn. I was out to the restaurant this morning. Everything is quiet. My Muslim neighbors, my Arabic neighbors, have no more interest in having a mess in their front yard than I do, or having martial law in the city than I do, and any of these tensions that they seem to be anticipating, it's on their end.
Well,
and I for one, am getting a little tired of it.
I think probably that's true of much of the entire world right now. And I remember back when they were first starting this whole thing, we have to go against Iraq and the rest of it. They hate us for our freedoms. No, it's the government that hates our freedoms. Look how many of our freedoms they're trying to take away from us by hook and by crook. People around the world love freedom. It's only control institutions, authority institutions, whether it's government or the church, they're the only ones who hate freedom, because freedom means you can't be exploited, you can't be harvested, you can't be told what to do for the sake of empire and crusade and so forth. So ordinary people love freedom. We all want to be free. It's only government that hates our freedoms. And again, we saw that a couple of months ago with those trial balloon articles in the New York Times where they're trying to sell the idea it's time to get rid of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. If some foreign terrorist said tear up the Constitution, we'd all say no, but now we've got the government saying, let's consider doing that. Barb, thanks a lot for the call. We got to do a station identification here, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I just did a quick web search. Our Skype is acting up again, so if you lose us briefly, apparently I am not alone in pointing out this latest Skype update appears to be a gigantic leap backwards, whether they're putting in more spy stuff for the NSA and they didn't check the code or whatever. But ever since the update that we got about a week ago, Skype is not working on the machine that I use to send this show to the RBN control room. On the iPad, where we were trying to communicate with some family we have in Great Britain, it took literally 4 attempts to connect before we got both video and sound. Same thing on my iPhone. I don't know what they've done to it, but they've really messed it up, and we're going to be looking for an alternative to Skype on which to communicate the show here. But it is a major, major headache here. But we're going to keep on going, but if all of a sudden I go away and you start hearing polka music, we're dealing with the quality control issues of the American software establishment here. Now, getting back to the anger and fury around the world at the awareness the U.S. government is spying on everybody, law-abiding citizens around the world, in order to presumably loot their business secrets for financial gain here. Stephen Lenman is saying that the political uproar from this spying is exacerbating already deteriorating international relations. America's foreign policy is an absolute catastrophe at the moment, and this spy scandal is not helping things. And he's saying it could actually accelerate the rush to outright war between all of these countries here. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, has issued his apology for erroneous statements to Congress, meaning he got caught lying. And senators, they say the apology doesn't cover it. Just apologizing for lying doesn't change the fact you were caught lying, and presumably you're going to go on lying to try and save your own butt. And the senators are saying they remain deeply troubled, as they should, as you should. We have a government that provably lies to you about everything, and nobody should start out giving the government the benefit of the doubt on anything at all right now. Lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons. Remember all the times in past years they denied they were spying on ordinary Americans? Now we find out it's been going on for 12 years. This government doesn't know how to tell the truth. The only way the government can control you is to lie to you, to tell you the things that will get you to do what the government wants you to do. Hate the Arab Muslims, love Israel, wage war endlessly across the globe, trust private central banking and Wall Street. Another story came out here, this is over at RINF.com, where apparently the Pentagon was trying to set up a database of ordinary Americans' lives back in 2003. So they're 10 years there, plus echelon all the way back to the 1980s. Apparently, security experts have discovered that Motorola's Android phone, the Droid X2, is apparently sending suspicious volumes of information when it's not actually in use, and apparently is doing so in the clear without even encrypting it. So that little smartphone that you've got with all the bells and whistles, that's the government's portable snoop right on your belt. And you know, you might want to start getting into the habit. If you are not actually going to need your smartphone, leave it at home. Turn it off or get one of these cases that isolate it from the cellular network. Get your privacy back. The government has declared war on your privacy. You have every moral and legal right to take steps to keep your lives private from a government that provably cannot be trusted with your private information. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Edward Snowden, in his latest statement, has come out saying the Obama administration isn't running a constitutional government. And I appreciate that, Ed, but truth is, we've kind of already figured that one out for ourselves here. So, anyway. Interesting little story. This is over at the Denver Post. Apparently, the Obama administration is now proposing changes to the Freedom of Information Act. This was the act that was supposed to keep the government transparent so that we could find out through various official records if the government was behaving badly. And I remember all the way back during the Vincent Foster case where it came out, there was a question that there was actually a second bullet wound on the body. And the photos of the body and the crime scene were all classified by the United States government. And there was a case that attempted to use the Freedom of Information Act to basically get those photos made public to either confirm or refute that there was a second gunshot wound on the body, which would obviously call that suicide claim into doubt. And this case literally went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which ruled that dead people have privacy rights, and therefore the Freedom of Information Act didn't apply to that particular case. But apparently right now the Obama administration wants changes to the Freedom of Information Act that would allow federal government agencies to lie about the existence of information being sought. In other words, if you're asking for a government document that's embarrassing to the government, Obama wants it to be made legal for the government agency to say, actually, we don't have that document at all. Go pound sand. That basically eviscerates the whole idea of the Freedom of Information Act, to allow the government to say, no, we don't have the document you want. That's complete nonsense. Secrecy begets tyranny. All this talk about a transparent government, and they're in panic mode. They're trying to shut down paint all the windows over with black paint, cut all the phone lines. They don't want you knowing what they're doing, because what they're doing is unconstitutional. This federal government has delegitimized itself by lying to you, by spying on you, by attacking your right to freedom of speech and freedom to peacefully assemble. This is not a legal constitutional government. Edward Snowden is absolutely right about that. It is therefore illegitimate. And you, the American, because the federal government has broken that contract with America called the Constitution. They're not a legal government. And you, the American people, are no longer legally or morally obligated to obey that government's dictates, to pay its bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the lives of your children in that government's wars of conquest to reimpose Bretton Woods on the entire planet. Now, over in Sana, which is the Syrian news agency, former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas has blown the whistle that the plan to invade Syria was on the table even before the internal strife began, from which we may deduce that the internal strife in Syria, given that all of these people causing the strife are hired mercenaries from other countries, the crisis, the so-called civil war, is obviously created as part of the plan to topple the Syrian government and bring them back into the warm embrace of private central banking and Bretton Woods and oil sold only for the U.S. dollars, and of course is that final stepping stone to the long lusted for war with Iran. Now, as I said before, this plan to dollarifize the world, to reimpose Bretton Woods, is an all or nothing deal. It doesn't work if some countries are still free to engage in trade without going through the dollar. And that because China has been promoting the gold-backed yuan as a replacement for the dollar in international trade, because the BRICS nations are setting up their own international currency to bypass the dollar, because Russia just took control of their central bank in order to turn the public currency back to a public utility, China and Russia are now on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. And we're hearing the propaganda, the drums for war, oh, bad Russia, bad China. War with Russia and China is a bad idea. They really do have nuclear weapons of mass destruction and the rockets with which to deliver them. But to the money junkies and the private central banks, hey, we'll blow up 1/3 the world as long as the remaining 2/3 remains a slave to our little private central banking scam for the next 100 years. That's their thinking. And China and Russia know that's what's going on. And needless to say, they're starting to make their preparations. Story out of From the Trenches World Report. China and Russia are now getting together for their largest naval drills ever. Huge, huge exercise to have coordinated Russian-Chinese naval forces in order to forestall America's naval forces. Not that they should worry. Remember that big scandal over that littoral combat stealth ship? Underarmed, under-armored, underpowered, computer systems wide open for hacking, fragile as a Christmas tree bulb. But some military contractor made huge amounts of money off of that. Over in Egypt, the situation is getting more and more tense. Yesterday, the Egyptian army issued a 48-hour ultimatum for President Morsi and his opponents to arrive at a peaceful compromise, or the army will take action. Both Morsi and his opponents have rejected the army's intrusion. So we may be looking at a military coup. And this is a major, major wild card, because what the U.S. plan was for Egypt, remember when Morsi came in, and there was a whole bunch of election fraud trying to throw the Egyptian election to one of Mubarak's right-hand persons who would have gone on being obedient to Israel and to the United States, and it was a huge election fraud and delays in the final count, and finally the Election Commission had to come out and say, yeah, Morsi won by a landslide. We can't lie about that, not with millions of people standing in the streets ready to go back to rioting. And Morsi, up until recently, was basically standing firm against the U.S. and Israel. Now, he got cowed into going along with no-fly over Syria, and have you noticed it wasn't a coincidence? It was at the point where Morsi sided with the U.S. and Israel against Syria that all of a sudden we started seeing protests in the streets of Egypt again. And the U.S. is back out there saying, oh, Morsi must go, we must have new elections, because the people who would run in those new elections are all pre-approved by the U.S. and Israel. They're all out of Mubarak's old regime. They want to put the old regime back in there. And that was the plan. But now you've got this wild card. The military may suspend the Constitution and the Parliament and simply declare martial law until they can get the country under control. And based on past experience, the Egyptian military is going to be even less friendly to Israel and the United States. And if that happens, this is another example of America's foreign policy blowing up in their face, because they're making all these plans with wishful thinking and optimism and brains addled with SSRIs and advice from failed novelists. And it looks like this attempt to bring Egypt back into the fold may wind up with an even more anti-American government in Egypt. Meanwhile, a rather interesting development kind of had our heads scratching for a while. The Egyptian military has deployed a large number of tanks in the Sinai along the border with Gaza, effectively along the border with Egypt. And it looks to me like the Egyptian military is concerned that if Egypt descends into chaos, Israel will see an opportunity to go in and retake the Sinai. And it looks like they're preemptively fortifying that border with Egypt in order to deter that. By the way, speaking of Israel, were you aware that Israeli companies have been contracted to provide security for U.S. nuclear power plants, U.S. Air Force bases, and even more amazing, our nuclear arsenal? We have Israeli companies guarding America's nuclear arsenal? It's just like back on 9/11, where all the airports that were being used by the hijackers were being guarded by the same Israeli company, ICTS Security. And now we have an Israeli company, Miguel Security Systems, which is owned in part by the government of Israel, is guarding America's nuclear weapons? Well, that ought to make it real easy for the Mossad to scrounge up a terrorist nuclear weapon to detonate somewhere in the U.S. and blame Iran for. We've got the U.S. government screaming about security and protecting our nation with all this spying, and yet all this spying is tangled in with Israel, and Israel's guarding our nuclear weapons. How does that make us secure? Interesting little story. This came out of the Jerusalem Post. The Jerusalem Post is admitting this, that back in the 1960s, Israel was buying yellow cake processed uranium from Argentina. And the U.S. objected to the sale but couldn't do anything about it because they can't do anything about Israel at any time. And here we have this bizarre historical oddity. George Bush lied about Iraq buying yellow cake uranium from Niger, and we went to war with Iraq because they're bad, evil people. Israel actually did buy yellow cake uranium from Argentina. Nothing is done. Israel was actually caught trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to South Africa. Nothing gets done. Israel is now openly admitting they're the world's 6th largest nuclear power. Nothing gets done. But by golly, we got to go bomb Iran because maybe somewhere down the road they might build a nuclear weapon. The propaganda is no longer self-consistent. They've lost the narrative, and I think that's why we have callers like the lady from Michigan just saying it doesn't make any sense anymore and I'm not buying it. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to the news, I just got an email from a listener saying that today their Verizon email would not open due to server error. Facebook twice today said they were having technical difficulties. Hotmail is not loading properly. So it looks like there's something going on the net all over the place that's interfering with all kinds of stuff, and that might be why we're all of a sudden having problems with our Skype. Manny in the control room is saying, I hate how we live in the age of technology, but everything has bugs. And the reason for that is very, very simple. When computers were first starting up as a brand new industry, they lobbied Congress for protection from product liability lawsuits under the excuse it's a brand new industry, it's just starting, we're going to make mistakes, we must be protected. Well, computers are no longer a fledgling startup industry. It's a major part of the U.S. economy. And the product liability should be taken away. Because if you're running a company and you buy a van for your company, and because of a design flaw it crashes and you suffer financial harm, you can sue the manufacturer of that van for having sold you a defective product. That's product liability. And it's what keeps manufacturers working to provide a good product to you, the American people. But if you, as the owner of that same company, you buy a computerized accounting system, and because of a design flaw it crashes, and you suffer financial harm, you can't do anything about it. You can't sue the computer maker, you can't sue the software company. We've all seen those end-user license agreements where we can just do what we want and we don't guarantee anything. You should count your blessings if it works at all, kind of an attitude. And that's why computer makers and software companies put all their effort into developing some new little thing that you'll just feel that you want to buy, and they don't worry about the bugs. They let their quality assurance departments go. You become the beta testers. Every time Windows comes out with a new operating system, they'll release it with 5,000 or 6,000 bugs and wait for you, the end user, to find them and document them and send them back in, because it increases their profitability. And at the same time, it decreases the productivity of the American people, because instead of spending our time working on something that we could sell and improve the balance of trade in this country, we're spending all of our time with patches and updates and upgrades and all the rest of it. Over the weekend, we were going to visit some friends we hadn't seen in a long time. They're back here in Hawaii. And I got lost, and so I got out my little iPhone with my little GPS on it, and I fire up the GPS, and before I could even find out where I was or how to get where I was going, I got like about 5 screens. Oh, this must be updated. This must be patched. Immediately install blah, 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 blah. And I cannot tell you how much it annoys me when I'm sitting, relaxing end of the day with my wife watching TV. We'll turn on the TV, and it says, oh, we are updating the new Smart Hub, blah, 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 blah. And we have to upgrade the firmware on your TV and on your Blu-ray player. And we sit there waiting 10 minutes while it's going out and doing the net connection and downloading whatever it has to do. I got to tell you, I guess I'm turning into a Luddite. I miss the days when TV had only 2 knobs on it, off-on volume and the channel selector, and that's all you had to worry about. Now we've got 4 remote controls with 20 buttons on them. My wife and I have both been on an actual real space shuttle. That was nowhere near as complicated as this TV system that we now have, that we're trying to basically punch through and find something worth watching. And most of what's on there isn't worth watching anyway. Have you seen that latest reality show where they have 2 completely naked people running around the forest trying to survive? Man, they are getting desperate for content out there. Alrighty, let's see. Getting back to the news, and this is a little positive piece of good news that I know we're all going to celebrate here. You remember that guy, Jeff Olson, down in San Diego, had written with water-soluble, washable chalk protests about banking on the public sidewalks in front of Bank of America. And Bank of America got in high dudgeon and say, oh, it cost us $6,000 to hose off this chalk. You've got to arrest this guy for vandalism. Huge amount of political pressure to say, you will not dare say bad things about the bankers. These are the 2 untouchables in our society, Israel and banks. You're not allowed to criticize either one of them. And so the city attorney charged Jeff Olson with 13 counts of vandalism. And here's where it gets bizarre. When it went to court, the judge banned any mention of First Amendment right to protest, and the jury acquitted Jeff Olson on all 13 counts. And he walked free, despite all the pressure and bribery and corruption Bank of America could bring to send a message, you don't dare say bad things about banks. The jury acquitted him on all 13 counts, and this is why we're supposed to have juries. In order to hold corrupt judges and prosecutors in check. And this is a good example of why we need to protect that. Juries are not supposed to be rubber stamps on what the judge wants. Any judge who attempts to co-opt or coerce the jury into simply going along with persecution of political people, it doesn't understand the constitutional purpose behind the jury. So victory for the jury system, victory for Jeff Olson, black eye for Bank of America, and we will be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show, and joining us now over Skype is Ryan Dawson. Konbawa Ryan, o genki desu ka?
Genki desu. I have some very interesting and useful things for your listeners. I just posted a 3-part series about how you can block the NSA and avoid the NSA. I talked to this guy from Germany who is in Japan. He's a security person, high-tech, geek, nerd, whatever you want to call him. Put it this way, he's got Will Wheaton and Adam West's autographs. That certifies him a geek and nerd in my book. But
I have Gene Roddenberry. I have Gene Roddenberry's autograph. Does that certify me as a geek?
Oh, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I think that's even better than Will Wheaton for sure. But Adam West, but yeah, I mean, it's not that technical either. It doesn't go over your head like even I understood it. And I'm not completely ignorant on computers, but I'm not, savvy either. And So I dumbed it down basically where people can get these things and they'll be able to secure their emails. They'll be able to secure basically everything except for calls on the phone. That's pretty much out. But there is a way you can use VoIP on the phone and it'll still work. So that's up on your site now. And just to talk about what you were talking about before about banks in Israel, those are the most taboo subjects, and I pretty much bash on both of those. It must be why I get censored so much.
Same here, same here. Those bankers do not like me at all. You know, oh, you're an NSA. Don't get me started. We'll be here all day long. The issue about NSA surveillance, there's two ways to go. One, of course, is to try and block the NSA from reading your traffic, and the other one is to go the other direction, leave it wide open, but just throw a lot of junk in there. We were talking yesterday about this Firefox add-on, which I presume will soon be available for all browsers, called Track Me Not, and all it does is it's going out on RSS feeds to get keywords, and then it executes a search to the search engines and then blocks the returning results. So you don't see it working. But what it basically means is anybody who's trying to build a profile based on your web searches is going to come up with absolute garbage because they don't know what is a real, genuine Google search and what is not. And it's not just Google. It does all the major search engines, Yahoo, Bing, and the rest of it, and just throws garbage out there. And we're already at the point where we have to question whether all this data they're saving on everybody is really worth anything or not, because they're data mining social media like Facebook, where people exaggerate, especially if they're trying to get a hot date for the weekend. And if we just throw more junk out there, and we're always using terrorism words like Allah and anthrax and nuclear and pandemic and all these other things, where it's just a huge volume of absolute noise, it's going to be impossible for them to actually find anything of any real value.
Yeah, it's best to do both, to put out a bunch of disinformation like they do, and to secure your real information. This is mainly for whistleblowers and things who I've had people trying to contact me. I'm like, don't tell me anything yet. So we've got this encrypted. This is good for Sibel and all her people, too. So this is a way, if you want to know how you can protect your stuff, plus throwing out a bunch of junk is always a good idea. Or you can just be open about it. But if you're ever going to run for office or anything, you might want to secure everything, because if they're not attacking you, they can still dig up dirt on your family or something else. So you can be careful on social networking.
There's a lot of dirt out there. You know, the problem with me is I can't be blackmailed with it, because I'm actually rather proud of most of what I've done.
Yeah, I wear mine like a badge.
Yes, yes. Yes, I went skinny dipping with the bunnies in Hef's pool, and I'm proud of it. Do you hear me? It was before I met Claire, obviously. Anything else, Ryan?
No, well, I'll let you go. I'm just listening in tonight.
All right, well...
it's 4:30 in the morning, but yeah. Keep it going, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Sayonara and domo arigato, and we'll have you back again anytime you want to come back on. We'd love to have you on the show. Now then, interesting little... story. This came out of the rebel.org, and it's not the first time I've seen it. They're asking the question, why all the zombie movies? It's like zombie mania over the last couple of years. Zombie this, zombie that. Apparently there's a brand new movie out, World War Z, which apparently is almost a direct copy of I Am Legend. The zombies created by a virus and all the rest of that. And we've seen all these military exercises to fight the zombie apocalypse, and everybody's saying, what is all this nonsense? You know, zombies are... yes, there's a historical basis for the zombie, but it's basically poisoning somebody with tetrodotoxin to basically make them into a willing worker. And why all this stuff about war against zombies and the rest of it? And I think the reason is very simple. As the U.S. government prepares to go to war against the 50 states and the American people, they need to dehumanize the American people in order to make it easier for the military to come out and start shooting us. And if you look at previous wars where the enemy is dehumanized with slang terms like slants, krauts, gooks, hajis, and I think the United States military posture is they're going to call angry, enraged, starving Americans zombies, so that all these soldiers trained to deal with the zombie apocalypse are going to be automatically conditioned to go ahead and pull the trigger on the American people, because we know that most American service people are really going to have a hard time shooting their friends and neighbors. And yes, the U.S. government will ship soldiers from Ohio to shoot people in California and soldiers from California to shoot people in Ohio, but still in the minds of the military, these are American citizens who are being gunned down. So I think part of the psychological preparation for a put down of an armed revolt is to dehumanize us Americans by calling us all zombies, and I think that's why we're seeing all this zombie stuff all over the media. And by the way, I don't watch those movies. I don't know anybody who does, but we saw zombie themes coming up in all kinds of reality shows about Red Jacket Firearms. I forget what the name of the show is, where they're out there and they're setting up zombie targets to blow away with their guns and stuff. So it's a pretty consistent theme we're seeing, and I think it's because zombies is now the new code word for rioting Americans. And that's why they're having these zombie apocalypse military exercises. We all know there's not going to be a real zombie apocalypse as portrayed in the movies. They're getting ready to declare war against the American people. Now, getting back to the economy here, interesting little story over at Gold Silver Worlds that the hammer down of gold prices that we saw over the last couple of weeks did inevitably spur demand for physical metal. Not the paper contracts, nobody's buying those anymore. But demand for the physical has been intense, and because of the law of supply and demand, gold prices are now going back up, as we told you they were going to do. The gold price has regained about 40% of the losses in June, and it will keep going on up again. Remember, if the bankers are going to work this hard to crush down the gold and silver prices, to keep you in the stock market, to keep you in savings accounts, take advantage of it. Now's the time to get physical. Physical, get physical. Anyway. Now you know why I'm not a professional singer. Let's see. We have a caller on the line, John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Concerning all the Monsanto GMOs and the banning and what have you in Europe. Now, there's stories appearing in the European press about similar actions being taken in America, although there is a dearth of information coming out of the mainstream media in America of activists, what I call eco-warriors, I suppose, not eco-terrorists, are going out into the wilds of Central America grain belt and burning this GMO corn and wheat and what have you, but it's not being reported on at all. I don't know whether you have any views on that.
Well, I'm aware that some GMO beets were being burned. 2 fields of those were burned. I actually have not heard of GMO wheat and corn fields being burned. And if it's happening, it's obviously something Monsanto dares not allow out into the public because they're aware that the public are absolutely furious over this foisting of these toxic materials into our diet. We know that Monsanto does not allow GMO in their own company cafeterias. They do not serve GMO at the White House. They do not serve GMO at the Parliament restaurants in Great Britain. And these are all politicians saying, "Oh, you should love your GMO. You should, you should embrace GMO. It's a wonderful product." It's an attempt to take corporate monopolistic control over food production on planet Earth, to make us dependent on Monsanto for our food, the way an earlier tyrant tried to make us dependent on the British East India Company for our various and sundry products here. But this GMO technology is blowing back in their face because it wasn't fully vetted as being safe. We know it is in fact quite harmful. And so I'm not surprised that we saw the beet fields being burned. This revelation about this contaminated wheat field up in Oregon has raised suspicions that all of the wheat in the United States may be tainted. We know that foreign purchasers of American wheat are now canceling their contracts. And Monsanto's attitude is, well, if we can't sell it to other countries, we will force the American people to buy and eat it. If there have been other torchings of GMO fields, I can't say that I blame them. I'm not going to encourage that kind of activity because those kinds of fires can get out of control. I don't know. Maybe that's what caused all these wildfires that they've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. I remember seeing at least one report where they were looking at criminal activity as the cause of one of these fires. But certainly in the United States of America, Monsanto absolutely will not want it to be known to the general public that people are starting to burn these GMO fields because a lot of people are going to say, yeah, it's a good idea, let's do it. And, you know, that could very quickly spiral out of control.
Just as an aside, Michael, I know the RBN is on a donations run.
Yes.
I would like to see Michael Rivero do a hula dance in a garland, flower garland, and grass skirt, non-GMO, of course, natural, only natural.
Yes.
I'm sure that would go viral.
Well, it's going to take a lot of zeros, but if the zeros show up, yes, I will do that.
Well, I'd be willing to pay $5 at least to see you do that.
It's going to take a little more because I have no sense of rhythm. I was born with 4 left feet.
Anyway, keep up the good work, Michael, and nice talking to you again.
All right, thank you very much for that. All right, let's see. We have Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How you doing? Yeah, we live next to a foreclosed home that's been empty for over a year. Bank of America owns it, and about once every 3 weeks they come out and cut grass. There's an acre and a half to the home land, okay, and they cut about 1,500 square feet. And over the past year, the grass that they don't cut is maybe 3 foot tall, and we have field rats. I don't know if you know what a field rat is.
I know what a field rat is, yes.
8 to 10 inches long, and they get into my shop. We'd stopped feeding our birds at the feeder because the rats were there, and I had talked to the bank, and I have no results whatsoever, but it's a shame that I have to live next to something like that because we live in a neighborhood that's anywhere from 150 to 200, moderate neighborhood, 150 to $200,000 homes.
Yes.
And of course, it's not a what do you call it? A subdivision that has. I'm trying to think what they call it. Where you have to follow rules and regulations.
Homeowners association. Planned neighborhood. Planned neighborhood.
Right, but I mean, I've talked to the bank and with no results whatsoever. But it's a shame that I killed 4 of them, and I told them that I was going to take them up to the bank and drop them off at the front door, but I didn't do it because I know I'd probably get in jail just like the man that took the chalk and wrote on the...
Well, he's out of jail. The jury acquitted him on all 13 charges. They let him walk and said, yeah, people don't like the banks. Big news flash on that one. You're actually lucky the bank is even taking that much care of the home because a lot of these foreclosed homes are just being allowed to rot in order to create an artificial new shortage of housing to drive the prices back up again. And a lot of these homes are just completely neglected to the point where they're going to have to be condemned and stripped back down to the bare land. But the banks are only doing the absolute minimum they need to do to maximize their profitability. And no, Bank of America will not come out and do any pest control as a result of their neglect, and that's just the way it is with life under fascism.
Well, it's a shame to have to live that way. And our place, my wife is a flower lady, so I mean, we really take good care of our place, but it's a shame that we have to live under these conditions.
It's everywhere. I mean, here on Oahu, we're seeing a renewed surge in evictions and foreclosures, and it's just heartbreaking to see it happen. And these people, you know, they're showing up at the food programs because they're going hungry, and it's very hard to look at. But we have to open our eyes and look at what's going on to this country.
Oh, that got me going the other day. Someone was trying to run some kind of charity for clean water in Africa, and I don't know if you've seen that, you know. And there's people in this country that are going hungry. You know,
we were talking about.
I'm going to make this quick.
Okay.
I called up and said, can I find a family in the United States that I can help out to feed and give them clothing? And no, I had to go through UNICEF or something like that and take someone from another country.
Well, we were
understand that.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday. It's part of the propaganda. We see all these TV commercials about, oh, feed the starving children over in Malaysia or Indonesia or Africa, and they're not doing any commercials about feeding the starving children in this country because that's part of the propaganda, that as bad as things are here in the U.S., it's really much worse everywhere else, so you shouldn't complain. But believe me, if you get involved in a community food bank or Feeding the Hungry program, you're going to realize we've got a major, major hunger problem among children and adults in this country that the corporate media and the government don't want you seeing. And that's why they're going to wave TV commercials about, oh, they're hungry on other parts of the world here. That's part of the propaganda, that things are still better here in the U.S. than they are anywhere else in the world. And again, it is not so. We've got a lot of hunger in this country. And that's, I think, why so many people are angry about Obama going over to Africa and playing benevolent benefactor with our tax dollars to rebuild Africa's electrical infrastructure.
Right.
Oh, more than that, $7 billion. $7 billion. And we've got infrastructure problems in this country that are simply being ignored. So, Jim, got to let you go. We're coming up. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take some more phone calls here. Dan in North Carolina. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael, in South Carolina. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm just reading. You were talking earlier about Israeli incursions into our space. There's an article in the Dallas Business News which indicates that Israel is building the world's largest water desalination plant in Texas.
Okay.
It also indicates that somehow they have managed to buy out most of Noble Energy, which is a Texas oil and gas export company. They now have 3 Israeli partners. But the really scary thing is that I did not know this. Israel already owns 3 refineries in the USA.
Well, you know, I mean, the way it works is Congress votes to send your tax dollars to Israel. Israel turns around and buys up, you know, the best companies in the United States of America. Some of them they even take to Israel, like Intel. Intel was originally an American company. Israel simply bought it up, took it over to Israel and said, oh, we are now the world leader in developing new chips, and probably most of those chips have got Mossad backdoors in them. And, yeah, it's a pretty scary situation here. I mean, our Congress is literally selling the nation out from under us to Israel.
Well, it seems as though they're going to own a good share of the water supply for all of Texas, because it's kind of a complicated deal that they've worked out here. But, again, this water plant in San Diego is going to give them control. I mean, once people get accustomed to it, it's going to give them control of that particular valve.
Sounds like the plot line out of that James Bond movie, Quantum of Solace, where they went in and took control of the water supply and then ran everybody's prices up. Remember, we had the CEO of Nestle is gone on record saying, you human beings have no natural right to water. It must be commoditized and you have to pay for it.
Don't we have, critical mechanisms in this country anymore, like telephone, you know, and food and water and things?
It's called critical infrastructure, and yeah, the nation was originally set up where certain basic needs were handled as public utilities: phone, power, water, sanitation. But over time, it's all being turned into, you know, profit-making corporate activity that we are enforced to be dependent on. And then they wonder why all of a sudden the country is locking up economically.
Well, this is pretty grim to read the story once again in the Dallas News. It's pretty ugly because it appears as though this Anon company, which is recently formed, this Israeli company, sorry, not Anon, it's called Alon, has plans to continue their expansion. And I'll just read one sentence from
well,
this article.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time here, and I'm going to have to let you go, Dan. We have to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few brief words.
Thank you very much.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. We're going to go back to the phones here. Russ in Arizona. Aloha, Russ. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Russ, are you there? You're on the air.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, two quick, simple questions for you. I hate to ask you first, but you keep using the SSRI. What does that stand for?
selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It's a class of prescription psychiatric medication that is supposed to help people deal with attention deficit disorder and depression, but it has a very long and well-documented track record of actually triggering episodes of extreme violence and suicide. Virtually all of these mass shooters being waved around by the gun grabbers were either on or withdrawing from these medications, but of course the push is to demonize the guns. And because these SSRIs are such big money makers, nobody wants to challenge them. Corporate media doesn't want to lose the very lucrative advertising contracts from the pharmaceutical companies. Congress actually held hearings into the link between these medications and extreme acts of violence, but they chose to do nothing because they don't want to lose those big campaign donations in the next election cycle. And it's a huge, huge problem. It is contributing to the epidemic of violence within our country. We know that somewhere above 10% of the population are on these medications, which includes 10% of our police force and 10% of our government. And not only is there the issue of violence from the SSRIs, it basically muddies your thinking, and you start losing clarity of connection with the real world, and you can make some really, really bad decisions. So that's why we keep talking about those.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a good thing to talk about. I just didn't know that what SSRIs actually stood for.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, no, I understand. I agree with you 100%. Is that what happened to the guy in Aurora?
Quite possibly, but more recently, the medical records of these shooters are being withheld from the public, supposedly because of their right to privacy. But I think the gun grabbers and the pharmaceutical companies are aware that the American public is becoming very much familiar with this link between these medications and acts of violence.
Well, if you could put an explanation on your website, like you just told me, that would be great.
Well, actually, there is one. If you look at my website over on the right menu bar, you'll see a giant pill, and that is a resource page for people who want to look at these medications and the problems they can cause. And I had a personal experience with this many, many years ago when I was in the middle of my first marriage breaking up. My doctor, without my asking, just said, here, I'm going to give you a prescription for this antidepressant that's going to make you feel wonderful. And for 3 weeks it did. 3 weeks I felt great. And in the 4th week I had an adverse reaction that was just horrible. And I got through it by simply reminding myself it's a chemical reaction, it's a chemical reaction, it's a chemical reaction. So I know how dangerous these drugs are.
Okay, question number 2. This is pretty simple. You know, the ship a couple of weeks ago that broke in half with all those arms from the Syrian so-called rebels?
Yes.
Mercenaries? Did that sink to the bottom, or were those two halves towed into port?
No, it sank right to the bottom. And once the keel is broken on a ship, there is no recovery.
Well, I saw a picture on the net someplace where the two halves were still floating, and they were going to send tugs or something out to tow into some port. Is that true?
Well, you know, I'm going to back up and say that if the ship had proper watertight bulkheads and integrity, they may have been able to keep it afloat. But the first report I heard was that it had actually sunk. Maybe they got a picture of it while it was still floating because it may have taken a little time for it to happen. I'll go back and take another look at that, but my understanding is the ship actually sunk. We're going to have to let you go, Russ. We've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the phones here, looking at the closing of the American stock market, the earlier rally, upshove, whatever you want to call it, faded, and the American stock market ended just slightly in the red. Certainly nothing worth jumping off of Wall Street buildings for, but again, investors have to be looking at this behavior and realizing that this particular stock market bubble has pretty much peaked. And so it portends ill for the future for those Wall Street money junkies. My heart bleeds for them. Back to the phones here. Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Okay, Mike, very good. You were talking about infrastructure earlier before, and in the Northeast we have quite a bit of flooding. I mean, you know, because we got some heavy rains, and right away the local media and even the major media is blaming this on global warming. But that's not the truth. The truth of the matter is our infrastructure is decaying because it hasn't been upgraded in over 60, 70, 80 years. You can drive around any northeast small, Pennsylvania town or New York town or Ohio town and see hundreds of sludge pipes that should be taking care of wastewater from rain, clogged up, decaying, breaking apart. It has, these small to mid-sized towns are being stripped from everything. They have extremely high taxes due to unfunded mandates from the federal government and state government, yet there's not enough money to do the infrastructure to clear up these problems. And, Mike, when I was a kid, civil engineering was a very regarded career. There are hardly any real true civil engineers out there to deal with these type of problems. So they're going to blame global warming, but it's not exactly the global warming. The problem is we haven't put enough money into infrastructure to take care of all the water that comes down from just natural heavy rains.
Well, it's not only that, but, this last winter we had record-setting snow again, and when that melts, you get more flooding. But you're right. All of these disasters are exacerbated by the fact that our infrastructure has been allowed to decay. When Storm Sandy hit the Northeast, and they were talking about all this runaway flooding, and it all went back to exactly the same thing you're talking about. All these storm drains and flood control channels were blocked up with debris that hadn't been removed in years. We had all these people who were saying, the trees were no longer being cut back from power lines, so when the tree limbs came down in the storm, they would break the power lines. And that's exactly what it is. The government is not taking care of this country at all, which is what makes Obama going over and spending $7 billion for electrification of Africa even more angering and infuriating. We have all this money to prop up Wall Street, all this money to give to Israel, all this money to go into these wars, and the actual nation, the infrastructure, the job the U.S. federal government is supposed to be doing is being allowed to rot and decay away. Back down Hurricane Katrina. And all that flooding that took place there was because some of the levees to contain flooding along the Mississippi had been, they were in the process of refurbishing them, and it was canceled right in the middle where they hadn't completed the repair on the levee, which leaves it in the absolute worst condition to deal with flooding because it's not tamped, doesn't have the ground cover over the top of it, and of course that's the section that collapsed with the resulting flooding. And so our government is doing everything except the job that we expect them to do in exchange for our tax money.
Mike, if you want to really inflame the passions of Americans and really irritate them, regardless of political party, political persuasion, race, creed, whatever, when American people hear that we are given countries like Israel and the Middle East, it's just ridiculous money while our infrastructure here decays. That really inflames the passions of Americans.
It really does. I mean, because it's right in front of them. It's their home. It's what they think their community is supposed to be, and it's just rotting away. And we see that walking around all the time here on Oahu, where buildings are not being repainted. Metal is rusting and corroding away, and especially with the salt air environment that we've got here, you got to take care of stuff. We have a big problem with street lights just randomly falling over and hitting cars because they haven't been maintained, and the metal is now corroded all the way through. But they've got all this money to keep Waikiki and the tourist areas looking pretty and clean, but the rest of Oahu, especially out toward the northwest part of the island, it looks very third world over there. Some of these outer islands are just being completely neglected. And it's tragic to see it happen because we know the money is going into the government supposedly to take care of our country. I mean, that's the only legitimate function of government, is to do for the community that which the community needs but cannot organize for themselves at the individual level. That's the only legitimate purpose of government. And we have a government that's taking all of our money away and asking us to borrow to go to school, asking us to, buy more costly insurance for our health care. They're ignoring the roads, the hospitals, the schools, the bridges in order to shower wealth all over Wall Street, Israel, their political cronies, now Africa. It's completely out of control at this point.
Mike, you're a brave soldier. Thank you for taking my call, and keep up the good work.
I will, just as long as I can, as long as I can keep this Skype connection running here. Getting back to the economy here, this is a story coming out of 12160. Apparently, remember we've been talking about this gold bullion fraud that's been going on, and it was sort of highlighted when Germany requested their gold bullion back that was on deposit with the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve, and both those banks sort of hemmed and hawed and shuffled their feet and said, well, it's going to take us a few years to get that back to you, and then the next week they invaded Mali, which is Africa's third largest gold producer. Apparently there are stories circulating over in Great Britain that bullion buyers in London, investors in physical on a large scale, are being told they have to wait 100 days for delivery after placing and paying for their order. When they go down to the brokerages, they say, I want to buy 6 bars of gold, here's your money, and the brokerage is saying, come back in 100 days, I'll have your gold for you. And so the scramble is on to cover all the physical demands. We know that in Europe, certainly, a lot of these gold brokerages that have been selling this flood of paper gold contracts to try and keep physical prices down, those contracts are coming due. They're having to settle for cash plus a premium. And that's not going to last forever. Sooner or later, somebody is going to sue for failure to honor the contract and deliver the physical gold. And so that is why if you want to invest in silver and gold, and yes, the prices are on their way back up again, you can go over to Republic Trading Group and buy your physical silver and gold for them, and part of the uplift that you pay on that goes to help support RBN. And you take that physical and silver and you hang on to it. Those paper contracts are rapidly becoming worthless. They just print up more ink and paper to satisfy those contracts. And they're trying to crush down the gold and silver prices so the central banks can buy more of it to replace the gold bullion that they leased out or rehypothecated and now they don't have. I think this plan, because we've had 2 of these gold crush downs now, and I think the idea was they were going to try and stampede the American people into dumping their gold and silver to these gold scavenge places. And, of course, exactly the opposite happened. People went out and said, oh, buy opportunity. Now, remember what happened in Cyprus, the haircut or the scalping or the castration, depending upon your point of view. And they said, one time only, never happened anywhere else. Then we heard about it happening, getting ready to happen in Europe. We know that next year's fiscal plan for Canada includes investor-saver bailouts to keep the banks going. Now we're getting a story over out of This Is Money in Great Britain saying that the Bank of England policy is now transferring wealth from savers to fund the banks. This is their idea of a solution. We're going to take the money away from the people and give it to the banks so the banks can turn around and loan it back to the people at interest. That's the way they're keeping this whole thing going, whether it's over at the Bank of England or here in the United States with these bailouts. Because that's all these bailouts are, taking money from the people to give to the banks so the banks can loan it back to the people at interest to keep this little Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer, or at least until they can get World War III really going, in the hope that we'll all forget about how we got into this mess. Not likely to happen. Okay, we're going to take another phone call. Jesse in Utah. Aloha, Jesse. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Doing fine.
I just wanted to bring up, I'm over here visiting in Utah, actually. It's where I'm from. I got a buddy that's working at that data center that they built.
Yes.
And he's actually helped building it. And he was telling me about all these generators they got. And, I mean, he said it's just amazing how much money. He said it's actually quite incredible. But,
well, think of all the greenhouse gases that those generators are pouring out into the atmosphere, Al Gore.
Well, and that's the other thing is, I'm actually from a town called Mona. They just built the power station here, and then all of a sudden they built another one. I don't know if it's a substation or a power station, but he claims that the second one they built is actually for that data center. Mm-hmm. So my question is, who's got to pay for that power? I mean, that's got to be a lot of power pumping into there.
Well, you're paying for it. You're paying for it. It's coming out of tax revenues. I mean, the NSA isn't reaching into their own wallet for any of this stuff. Everything these government agencies are doing to spy on you is being paid for by you. And more importantly, they're using your computers, your Internet connection to spy on you, and that's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. That no one's property be taken by the government for the government's use without just compensation. And now we find out the government's been using your computers and smartphones and tablets to spy on you for going on 10 years. Any of you gotten a check saying, here's your reimbursement for the computer time and electricity and Internet connection that we used? I don't think so.
I'm hearing rumors here. They're saying that they're actually going to jack up Utah's taxes just to pay for that stuff. So.
I'm not surprised at all. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Dan, the man, is now in our control room, twiddling the dials and ready to answer the phone. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Now, getting back to the economic news, and this is over on blacklistednews.com, over in the European Union, antitrust authorities in Brussels have now sued 13 mega banks over collusion involving credit default swaps, where they were conspiring to block exchanges from intruding onto their business model of these credit default swaps, which are a nightmare all around the world, because these banks and financial institutions that sell these credit default swaps are not regulated, and they are not required to keep on hand cash reserves to make good on claims. That's what happened to AIG, which was selling credit default swaps on those mortgage-backed security bundles, which turned out to be fraudulent. They collapsed. AIG didn't have the money to make good on the credit default swaps, and they went belly up. We know that Wall Street has sold an estimated $90 trillion with a T dollars worth of credit default swaps against Europe's debt. That's one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve is cranking up all kinds of ink and paper and sending it to Europe to keep their banks afloat. Because when one of those goes, it's going to start a domino reaction that's going to bring this whole structure down here. So now you've got the European Union Antitrust Act authorities are suing these 13 banks over collusion to try and keep the credit default swap their own private little domain and not allow other exchanges come into it. Another little story, and this came out of Blacklisted News, growing scandal that the Federal Reserve is financially incentivizing banks not to lend money to the American people. And there is now $1.8 trillion parked at the Federal Reserve by the U.S. banks, and the Federal Reserve is saying, we will make it worth your while to just sort of let it sit there and build up a cash reserve for our use. People are saying, why are you doing that? You're looting the American people to give the money to the banks to loan back to the American people, and now you're telling them not to do that. And I think the reason for that is that all this newly created money, $85 billion a month, is being poured on the banks in order that their bookkeeping look like they are still solvent. But at the same time, they want to discourage that money from going out into circulation because it would kick off a hyperinflationary spiral. So they're literally creating the money in order to make the banks still appear to be solvent, but they're preventing that money from getting out into circulation in order to avoid inflationary pressures. I'm not sure how much sense that makes from the American people, but it seems to be the latest fraud to make everything look all hunky-dory by the U.S. government and the Wall Street financial centers here. Little story from over at reader-supportednews.org called War on the Unemployed, and it's castigating various Republican legislators for basically taking a policy that appears to want to punish the unemployed. Their theory is that if we make the unemployed even more miserable than they are right now, they will go out and find a job. And of course, that's extraordinarily stupid thinking. Nobody's unemployed by choice. They want to go out and do the jobs they got an education to do. And what we're seeing here is a clear case of denial within the government itself. They can't admit to themselves this economic disaster is the result of endlessly bad policy decisions, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, TARP, bailouts, QE1, QE2, QE infinity, tax codes that incentivize moving jobs to other countries, and of course the creation of the Federal Reserve itself. These are politicians. They never admit error or wrongdoing. It's either the imaginary playmate in the sky's will or somebody else's fault. And they don't want to look in the mirror, so they're taking the attitude of, oh, those American people, they're just being lazy. They could find jobs if we just flog them hard enough. There are no jobs out there. People who built careers went to school, lost their high-paying jobs when they went to other countries. They've had to take lower-paying jobs. It's not their fault. We're not lazy. We're not stupid. We're not without motivation. Wall Street and the Congress took away the means for us to earn a good living and pay our bills. If they hadn't done that, we would not be in this mess. If the U.S. government, instead of taking trillions of dollars away from the American people to pour all over those Wall Street fraudsters whose mortgage-backed security fraud created this mess, they could have fixed, if they'd moved that money the other direction, penalized those Wall Street firms who carried out the fraud, take trillions from them, give it back to the American people, how different life would be. Nobody would have missed a mortgage payment. There wouldn't be a real estate crisis. Nobody would have missed a credit card payment. There wouldn't be a credit crisis. People would have gone and bought American cars. They wouldn't have needed auto bailouts. People would go down to the shopping malls and buy whatever they felt like buying. There wouldn't be a retail crisis. What the U.S. government did in response to the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud was 180 degrees out of what would have worked to save the nation. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Bob in New Jersey. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? You might have covered this, but because I just got in a little while ago, I was listening to the radio in my car, and there's a $235 million refurbishing job for the Verrazano Narrows Bridge with a high-tech steel plate, which is lighter than they used to make the bridges with. And they claiming that it can only be made in China, but the AFL-CIO of New York says that there's plants that can make it 100 miles from here. And they also say that the technology was developed here, not in China, and then it was given to China. The $235 million, and they claim, is based more on the cost of labor, where it would be about $30 an hour for a steel worker here in a steel plant in this country, and it's about $10 to $15 a day in China. The thing that they seem to be forgetting at the MTA is that for every single job at a plant in the United States, it usually supports 5 other jobs. So I think this is quite a boondoggle for the MTA, but I would not be at all surprised if the Obama administration has their hand in it to favor China, because of all the leverage that China has over the United States.
Well, it's a complex issue, and you're absolutely right. China does enjoy a tremendous amount of leverage over the United States because of all the money the United States has borrowed from China. And we've lost a lot of our manufacturing. China's a manufacturing powerhouse. They're out there, and they're able to make really good products. I know a lot of people sort of have this image that made in China means crud, but you need to understand something about the Chinese. They will make and sell you exactly what you ask for. And if you are a company like Apple saying, make me an iPad or an iPhone, and China will say, yes, here's your quality product. And we all know how good those are. But we have this American importers whose attitude is, make me the cheapest piece of crud you can so I can maximize my profits. And the Chinese are going to go, all right, if you want cheap crud, we'll sell you cheap crud, and that's what we'll make for you. So the issue really is we've allowed this money junkieism to so completely overwhelm our society. Everybody's looking out to maximize their profits and keep the stockholders happy. And the fault here is with the United States government, which very quickly could simply say there's an import tariff on foreign labor and foreign products in order to stimulate business here in the United States of America. But clearly, they're not interested in doing that because the companies that are making huge amounts of money by offshoring your jobs, they're good campaign contributors. We know starting in the Bush administration and accelerating under Obama, according to research done by the Hackett Group, the U.S. tax code actually rewards corporations for taking jobs out of the United States of America and taking them over to these foreign countries. And it's all about maximizing immediate profit, and nobody's thinking about the long-term harm to the country. Hey, that's going to happen in somebody else's term in office. I don't have to worry about it. That seems to be the prevalent attitude in government right now.
You're quite true. I first had my instance of it with the Caribbean Basin Initiative Program, and I dealt with Charlie Cardigan of the National Labor Council and all of his work that he did, where the U.S. government actually funded the offshoring of the garment industry, and New York was extremely hurt by it. I used to go through New York City. I had to get to the west side. It was always a nightmare going through the garment district. Now you sail through because 95% of our clothing is now made overseas. The government actually showed them how they could they get the tax write-off by getting quotes that were above the cost of the material and write this off. It was just amazing. The government itself paid for the closing down of the garment district here, and that was just the beginning. Then came NAFTA and GATT and all the other so-called free trade deals.
And now, of course, we have this Senate immigration bill, which looks to be dead on arrival in the House, thank goodness, but they're talking about instant citizenship for 30 million illegal immigrants who would then flood onto the workforce. And we already have a massive jobless problem in this country. I know the official unemployment rate is, they're saying it's 7, 8, 9%. We know the real jobless rate is closer to 40%. And they keep the number down through all these various bookkeeping tricks. And the problem that we have with our current government and corporate attitude is that everybody's looking out for their own immediate interests, their own profitability, their own agenda. Nobody is maintaining the overview of what is best for the nation as a whole, and that is supposed to be the job of the federal government. And they've completely walked away from it. They're there to simply sell access, sell laws, sell whatever to their favored donors and lobbyist groups. Everybody's out looking for their own particular interests and just hoping it'll all work out in the end, but it won't. And you need to go back and look at Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash, whose doctoral thesis proved that Adam Smith's contention that everybody being personally greedy was good for the system as a whole. And John Nash proved that did not work, as does current events. But both our financial system and our government continue to worship at the altar of Adam Smith. I'm going to do what's good for me, and somehow the whole system will move forward. And obviously that is not working.
Well, the other thing on the amnesty bill, if I might add, I've lost you there.
No, I'm here.
Okay. The amnesty bill also would be a 13-year thing to get into the citizenship. So for those 13 years, that person would not be eligible for Obamacare. So in a company that with more than 50 or more employees, he could lay off his American citizens as workers, hire the illegal aliens, pay the minimum wage for 13 years. So it actually incentivizes the firing of Americans. It will lower the tax base also of the country. And these are the things politicians never look at. If your tax base goes down, you can cut spending all you want. It's not going to help because you'll have inflation. You have your tax base continually diminishing. So you're going to continually be cutting, and you're just digging your own hole.
Well, we saw that in Greece, and of course now we know that the spreadsheet on which all of these austerity programs based their policy was erroneous. There was a mistake in one of the formulas. There was one entire category of data and information that wasn't even being referenced. They put together this spreadsheet to say, oh, austerity can work to save the economy. It was completely flat out wrong. Nobody double-checked it before using it to set national policy in several countries. And very obviously austerity doesn't work because you're firing off all those public workers. There are no private sector jobs for them to go to. And yes, you're right, your actual tax revenues go down. We saw that happen in Greece. And again, it's everybody looking at their own immediate desk, their own immediate whatever, and say, I must accomplish this to keep my supporters and my backers and my donors happy. And nobody has the overview. Nobody has the long view. Nobody's thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the road because it's somebody else's term in office and I don't have to worry about it. And that's a terrible, terrible way to run a country.
It is, yes.
Okay?
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Now,
Joe, keep it up.
I will do my best here. Getting back to the workers, those who actually do have jobs. This is a story came out of the New York Times. We are seeing a growing trend where employers are paying their employees, instead of using a paycheck or a direct bank transfer, they're handing them prepaid debit cards. Here's your pay for this week on your debit card. Talk about a slap in the face. These people aren't making enough money to get by as it is. And by going to these debit cards And I have to wonder what inducements or incentives employers are being given to go this route. Means that when these workers use the debit cards to get the money they've worked for, they have to pay a fee. They have to pay the bank a fee to get their own money out. $1.75 every time they want to make a withdrawal from their little pay card. $2.95 for a paper statement. If they lose the card, it costs $6 to replace it. If you're trying not to use the card, some banks even have a $7 inactivity fee. It's just another way of taking from the people to keep the banks alive to use those cards. It is unfair to the workers to give them a little plastic card with their weekly pay on there with the understanding that the bank is going to keep part of that for having had that little card. We have reached a stage of complete predatory behavior on the American people by Wall Street and by the government to keep this whole thing going along. And that's not even getting into this E-Verify system that they're trying to sell as part of this immigration thing to make sure you're a citizen. The E-Verify system will require you, the American, to carry a tamper-proof Social Security card, national ID. And before you can go to work, you will have to show the card to your employer. Your employer will then have to go to the government to verify your eligibility to hold a job in the United States, to make you dependent on the government to get a job. Remember that word, dependency. We're going to be talking about that an awful lot tomorrow when we talk about Independence Day and what prompted the American Revolution. Tyrants want you dependent on the government and their financial cronies for everything, because if you're dependent, then you're a slave and you can't break free. They hate independence. And so now the government, the government is still advertising for people to go on food stamps, so you'll be dependent on the government to eat. And E-Verify will make you dependent on the government to get a job. Because if you're dependent on the government, you won't speak out about NSA Gate, DOJ Gate, EPA Gate. Dependency is slavery. Your chains are made of those Federal Reserve notes and these little plastic cards. It's time for it to stop. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. We've got Linda in Utah. Aloha, Linda. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, thank you for doing what you're doing. You do a terrific job. I'm a MBA graduate of a few years ago in the 80s. And I came into the MBA program from a classics background, so I had a very big culture shock. My biggest takeaway from this program, which I consider to be a serious exercise in nonsense, by the way, is that there is no business ethic aside from making a short-term bottom-line profit for your investors this quarter. If you don't do that, you're out. There's no business ethic.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. It's all about making the numbers look good at the end of the quarter, keep the stockholders happy, and the corporations feel no responsibility to the society or the nation as a whole because the government goes along with this thing. It's all about making money, getting our piece of the action in tax revenues. Sure, go ahead and put out vaccines that are dangerous and make a bunch of money. The resulting lawsuits, that's just the cost of doing business. Go ahead and sell GMO food and take monopolistic control of food production. And if it's killing off a bunch of the people, well, heck, we'll just sell them more medications to treat the symptoms. It is. I mean, and I've got nothing against being rich, but when you allow the desire for wealth to completely override every other consideration in a society, it's destroying the best of our human nature to be thinking like this.
And not only that, you're not only destroying society at large, you're destroying your company in the long run, as you have admirably pointed out a minute ago. And what was really disturbing, the only good class I took in that 2-year program was a business ethics class. And the professor was phenomenal, and the issues that he raised were really worthwhile. What was disturbing about that class is the fact that 3/4 of my classmates did not get it because, of course, the only true business ethic is make a short-term bottom-line profit this quarter. And anything that gets in the way, be it a moral consideration or societal consideration, is totally irrelevant.
No, you're absolutely right. And by the way, that idea of
We sowed the wind and we're reaping the whirlwind now. This is not a surprise.
Well, you know, that idea of a company that just goes for the short-term profits and then goes out of business, that's actually become a business model. I start a brand new company, I import some really poorly made junk from China, I mount an advertising campaign and sell as much of it as I can, and then when all the complaints and failures start coming in, I declare bankruptcy and shut the company, and meanwhile I've got 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 million parked over in the Cayman Islands. There are businesses that actually start up where that's the plan. We're going to be in business for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, we shut it all down and we vanish with our wealth and we retire early. That's literally where, you know, why we have so many really poorly made products being pitched at us on TV all the time.
Mm-hmm. Or we get control over the politicians in Wall Street and we become too big to fail and do the same thing, but expect the taxpayers to bail us out.
Yeah, that's the other business model. We don't care if we succeed or fail, because if we succeed, we keep the money, and if we fail, the government will take money from the people and give to us. That is fascism. We are there.
Got it.
I was talking with a friend of mine who'd lived in Spain under Franco, and he was just saying, yeah, we're there here in the United States. I know fascism, and this is fascism.
But you talk to these professors in the law schools and in the business schools, and they're clueless. They don't have any idea that that's what they're teaching.
Well, I know certainly in law school, lawyers are not taught to think in terms of truth or fact or justice. They are taught to win at all costs by hook or by crook. And the idea of the person they're defending doesn't matter if they're really a serial killer or not. Your job is to get them off. And there's almost no honor left in our society. I mean, one of the things I admired about Japan, certainly in its historical period, was that commitment to personal honor and doing the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. But there's precious little of that in the United States right now. I've talked to people about, this is what I'm doing to make money. Aren't you hurting people? It's their fault because they let me do it. I hear that a lot. Yes,
right?
Yes, I hear that a lot from people. Yes, I'm cheating people, but it's really their fault because they allow me to do it. And it's a terrible, terrible way to run a society. It's good for the quick-term profits, but you're right. It's leading to our complete societal collapse. Okay? Anything else, Linda?
No.
Okay. Well, Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you hear. We're almost at the end of this segment and our final commercial break here. Let's see here. I got to skip on down. I didn't get to most of my talking points. More evidence the U.S. middle class is sliding toward third world status. Middle class rage is sparking the protest movements in Turkey, Brazil, Bulgaria. Apparently, Turkey is flaring up again over the death of an activist. Meanwhile, the director of the Vatican Bank has resigned amid concerns it was once again being used for an offshore tax haven and money laundering activity. They better start looking underneath those bridges along the Thames in London. We'll be back after this commercial break. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Kind of an interesting little story. This is from the Trenches World Report. Over in Ohio, there was a bit of a stink because the police were setting up random drug checkpoints where they would pull cars over at random and just do a search for illegal drugs. Now that, of course, is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Absent probable cause, the police can't go into your car. So what the Ohio police did is a bit of a dirty trick where they set up a phony drug checkpoint and then a bunch of signs ahead of it saying you are coming up on a drug checkpoint where you may be stopped and searched. And then they waited for anybody to like turn off to a side street or turn around and go away. And that, they declared, is probable cause that they've got something to hide. Very, very sneaky people. By the way, a couple of interesting videos, or actually tragic videos we have at whatreallyhappened.com. Over in Hawthorne, the police arrested a man for filming them on the street, which is legally allowed. It was an illegal arrest. And then they just shot the man's dog. And I looked at the video. The dog looked like he was kind of playing around. He saw all these people around, and he's just sort of wagging his tail, and the cops just hauled off and shot the dog and let it lay there in the street twitching and kicking. Got to be a real manly man to shoot a dog like that. I know enough about dogs. That dog was not presenting a threat. He looked like he wanted to play. Throw a ball. And the second video, and this is just disgusting. This happened on a school ground where there was a baby squirrel, not a big full-size squirrel. A baby squirrel had wandered onto the playgrounds, and this cop is there in front of the school children pepper spraying this little baby squirrel to make it go away. And the kids are all traumatized. You got to be a real manly man to whoop on a baby squirrel with your pepper spray. You know, just shoo it away. It's a baby squirrel. It's not harmful. It's just looking around. I mean, what is wrong with the police in this country? Don't they have, like, real crimes to deal with? You know, if you want to go and pepper spray or shoot somebody, how about the corrupt politicians or those Wall Street CEOs? Oh, there's an idea. If Edward Snowden's looking for some place where he's beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement, he should go to Wall Street. Meanwhile, another scandal over at the Tourism Suppression Agency. Apparently, they got caught cooking the books on how much all of this crotch grabbing and laptop breaking and stealing of your iPads costs in order to get more money. They're lying to the Congress about how much all this stuff really costs in order to get more money. Nice people they've got over there at the TSA. Oh, my goodness. Now they're talking about cameras in all of our schools to monitor the emotional state of students. Oh, you look depressed. Here's a prescription for SSRIs. Oh, let's see. Yeah, Dan in the control room says the most disgusting thing about that video from Hawthorne was the officer didn't even put the dog out of its misery. Just let it lie on the ground, shot in the belly. Really. Nice people in these blue uniforms here. That's it for our show. We'll be back tomorrow, the day before Independence Day, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay angry. You deserve it. Make good choices. Please support Republic Broadcasting. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.